Very much.
Thank you.
Let's move on. As frequently evidenced by officials nationwide, Americans, when drugs are concerned, rarely choose logic when they can opt for hysteria. Case in point, the recent hoopla over steroids. In light of the media excess, the public pronouncements, and the wailing in Washington, one would assume that the scientific evidence establishing the health risks of steroids is overwhelming. But it's not. On the contrary, when it comes to steroid use among adult males, the evidence reveals virtually no fire despite all the smoke. As Armin Katayan reports, the science of steroids, or the absence of it, suggests some conclusions that few people want to hear.
More on our top story, steroids in Major League Baseball.
Unless you've been living on another planet, you've probably heard the drumbeat getting louder and louder by the day.
This is an epidemic in America.
From local news to national news.
They can cause a whole host of problems.
Some people have died from steroid abuse.
All the way up to Capitol Hill, where Congress has held hearing after hearing after hearing on leveling the playing field and saving the children. Even the president has spoken out.
The use of performance-enhancing drugs like steroids in baseball, football, and other sports is dangerous, and it sends the wrong message.
Anabolic steroids, it seems, have suddenly become public health enemy number one. It's enough to make you wonder, why? Before we really get started here, let's be clear on a couple of main issues. Yes, anabolic steroids can create an unlevel playing field. And yes, they are dangerous for kids. But what about healthy adult men? What are the long-term effects for them? Want to know how many scientific studies definitively link the use of anabolic steroids to death or even serious health risks? 1, 15, 20? Nope. Try 0.
Where are the bodies? Where are the bodies?
44-year-old John Romano is on the other side of the steroid spectrum, the side you almost never hear. Romano is the senior editor of Muscular Development magazine and a longtime user of anabolic steroids, synthetic derivatives of the male hormone testosterone.
How long have you been taking anabolic steroids?
On and off since I was 22.
So for more than 20 years?
Almost 23 years, yeah.
Any health problems?
None.
Heart problems?
None.
Liver problems?
None.
Romano, who lives in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, says he knows hundreds of guys just like him. Not necessarily pro or even competitive athletes, just people using anabolic steroids as part of a workout regimen designed to get bigger, look better, and recover quicker in the gym. We followed Romano to Guadalajara, Mexico, where anabolics are widely available without a prescription, and unlike the United States, openly used without fear of arrest or imprisonment. Romano says this is where he comes so he doesn't have to break the law back home.
I'm going to use some fast-acting testosterone with some slower-acting testosterone.
He says he cycles on and off the drugs to clean out his system and routinely gets his blood work checked to flag any potential problems. Again, let's be clear. As with any prescription drug, we're talking about use, not abuse. And we're talking about healthy adult men, not women or kids, who face dangerous long-term changes to their bodies.
It's something you really need to know what you're doing. These are powerful hormones, and if you go about doing them without knowing how to do them, you can get yourself in trouble.
Still, Romano says not one of his friends here or back home has had any of the kind of serious heart, liver, kidney, or infertility problems we keep hearing about.
To just report on one side and just constantly say the same rhetoric over and over and over. Steroids are bad, steroids are dangerous, steroids will kill you, they'll rot your liver, kill your kidneys. It's wrong.
To report it as if you're taking your life into your own hands when you take these things, it's exaggerated.
Dr. Norm Faust is a bioethicist and a pediatrician at the University of Wisconsin. A graduate of Princeton University, he has a medical degree from Yale and a master's from Harvard.
There are plenty of doctors I could find who would say point blank, they cause liver cancer, they cause heart problems, infertility. What's wrong with what these doctors are saying?
What's wrong with Dick Cheney saying there are weapons of mass destruction? I mean, it's just wrong, that's all. You show me the beef. That is, we want to see some data or some evidence.
There's no data, no evidence in your mind to support any of these health risks?
There are some health risks for sure. I mean, they do cause acne, they do cause hair loss. They make the good cholesterol go down and the bad cholesterol go up. but the life-threatening health risks, there's very little evidence to support these claims that are made over and over again.
In fact, if you look at some of the short-term studies which have been conducted, you'll see the one that gave the highest doses of testosterone to men, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, found just a few cases of acne and breast tenderness, but, quote, no other side effects were noted. And the National Institutes of Health, our own government, clearly states on its website, the incidence of life-threatening effects appears to be low.
Are you the long-term study?
I really believe I am.
That's because Bob Clapp has been routinely using anabolic steroids for more than 40 years. He will be 70 years old in July. He also says he has no health problems, showing us his recent blood tests to prove it.
Critics would point to you and Bob and say, well, you're just one person. Other people could smoke for 50 years and not have emphysema or cancer.
Of all the things they pick that can be wrong with you, it's virtually impossible that I wouldn't have had one of them.
Clapp began using anabolic steroids to help him compete as a bodybuilder in the early 1960s and says he never looked back. This is Clapp in the Mr. Arizona competition at the age of 50. Yes, Bob Clapp is one of the true believers on this issue. So much so, he served 2 years in prison in the early 1990s for possession and distribution of anabolic steroids. He says the judge would have reduced his sentence had he showed any remorse for his crime. Clapp refused. These days, though, he doesn't need to break the law, because at his age he can come here, a local anti-aging clinic, one of hundreds that have recently sprung up across the country. Doctors prescribe testosterone to men with low levels of the hormone, which typically diminishes as they age.
This is 200 milligrams of testosterone.
It's called hormone replacement therapy.
Over the 40 years that you've been using, how many people do you know personally that have used anabolics?
2,500.
2,500.
That I just absolutely know. In other words, I did the following. I observed it, I injected it, I went to prison for it.
Of those 2,500, any of them have any heart, kidney, liver, health problems?
And I was able to follow through their lifetimes, or up to these points, or any point thereof, none.
Look, some people will get away with it, and some people will rob a bank and never get caught.
Dr. Gary Wadler is one of the most respected and outspoken critics of anabolic steroid use, repeatedly testifying before Congress on the issue.
I'm looking for the bodies, looking for this health scourge that people talk about, and frankly, we can't find it.
The trouble with steroid-related deaths, the trouble with steroid-related coronary events, there's no telltale marker that you do an autopsy and say, aha, there is the signature of steroid abuse.
Would you give it to me that there aren't a lot of specific connections to these drugs and health risks? A lot of anecdotal information, a lot of supposition, but direct scientific evidence?
Because of what we know it does do to clotting, to cholesterol, to heart muscle, to coronary arteries, I take the position that we have to be extra cautious.
Wadler says between the impact on cholesterol, rise in blood pressure, and the mood swings, these are dangerous drugs. And Wadler points to an earlier pill version of the drug, no longer widely used. Turns out those were linked to potential liver problems. To him, it all spells trouble.
I'm just trying to find the science.
In my judgment, giving long-term steroids for a non-medical indication to see what might happen is a study that I don't think should be done.
So if not one long-term study exists, how did we get to where we are today? From a one-time miracle drug used to combat anemia and wasting diseases in the 1940s and 50s to an illegal drug in 1990. Many people point to this moment at the 1988 Olympics, when the public perception began to shift. When Canadian Ben Johnson beat America's golden boy Carl Lewis in the 100 meters, and then tested positive for steroids. In the wake of the cheating scandal, Congress took action.
Steroid abuse is already a problem in America.
They passed the Anabolic Steroids Control Act in 1990, classifying the drugs as Schedule III controlled substances, despite the fact that the American Medical Association, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Drug Enforcement Agency all oppose the move. And within months, the crowning blow, the ravages of steroid abuse, finally had a face. One of pro football's true warriors, Lyle Alzado, suddenly appeared decimated and frail on NBC News, claiming steroid use had led to brain cancer.
It got me where I wanted, but also got me very sick.
Less than a year later, Alzado was dead.
It's the death of Lyle Alzado. What impact did that have?
Huge. I mean, I think he is the poster child for the evils of steroids and the wages of sin. It just turns out it's wrong.
That's right. Ask any steroid expert and they'll tell you Alzado did not die from steroid use. Even Alzado's own doctor confirmed to Real Sports, quote, "There is no known association between Alzado's death and his use of steroids." Whatever the public hysteria at the time, privately guys like John Romano and Bob Clapp weren't buying into the dangers of these drugs. And they still don't.
Let's just deal with the long-term health risks associated with anabolic steroids. In your mind, are there any?
There's one side effect that is there for absolutely sure, is they work.
They absolutely work. They work profoundly. And, you know, you look good, you feel good. I mean, the sense of well-being is unbelievable.
I just don't think we play Russian roulette this way. I think it's absolutely a form of Russian roulette, which is unjustifiable Russian roulette.
John, we talked back and forth about long-term health risks. How do we know there aren't any?
Well, you know, that's true, except for the fact that there's an awful lot of guys that have been using steroids for 20 or 30 years that are perfectly healthy, vibrant examples of what responsible, intelligent use of these very powerful drugs can do.
Armin, the first question's pretty obvious. In the absence of health damage, how do you explain the uproar?
Well, it's a lot of anecdotal evidence, Brian. I think that's the way you have to look at it. Certainly, something like deaths, for example, there have been about a dozen supposedly linked in some fashion or form.
Supposedly.
Right, to anabolic steroid use. We've done the research. We talked to the chief researcher who happens to be at the U.S. Army, who has gone through all the case reports, came up with about a dozen, but they are not definitively linked to steroids in any way. So there is a lot of anecdotal evidence on both sides here. I think what we've been trying to do in this piece is just to move that pendulum back a little bit more towards the center.
Your personal history on this is very revealing also, because you've been writing and reporting about this for years, and you were as guilty as anyone.
Absolutely. In fact, I think if people are pointing fingers, they could certainly point them back in my direction, dating back to my days at Sports Illustrated in the mid-1980s when I was reporting this story. And frankly, when it was presented to me this time, I went, what? There are no long-term studies on anabolic steroids. There are the DEA and the AMA were resistant to them becoming controlled substances. So, yes, the answer is I've learned a lot in this story as well.
We should also note that we're talking here about healthy adult males.
Yes.
When we talk about young males and women, it changes considerably.
Right. We were very careful in this piece to narrow it down to healthy adult men. When you talk about kids, you've got issues with growth plates, you've got serious emotional issues, and when you talk about women, you're talking about the male hormone, not estrogen, but testosterone, and some serious questions involving use of testosterone, certainly by females.
Yeah, real eye-opener here.
Me too, man.
Armin, thanks very much.